Hi everybody, this is Mona. We're going to go ahead and get started. Today is day one of our IMA for Beginners series. I am recording today's webinar, and later today I'll be sending out a link to the video as well as the PowerPoint. So I'd like you to try to test out the chat feature. If you can hear me and you can see the presentation, please let me know the following information: your location, your city and state, your store format, whether we sell your products for Sears, Kmart, or both, and your flow type. So DC, BSC, JIT, those are some examples of flow types. So for example, Antioch, Illinois, Sears, DC, and BSD. So if you could test out the chat feature by letting me know that information, I'm going to come back to that in a couple of slides. You may see it indicated, depending on how you're viewing the webinar, you may see it indicated as notes instead of chat. Also, if you could make sure to send the notes out to the entire group rather than just the presenter. Sometimes I don't see notes sent only to the presenter until the end of the presentation, so that makes sure that I see it more during the presentation. All right, just some quick webinar etiquette I'd like to go over. If you could please make sure to keep your phone on mute when you're not speaking, that would be really helpful. If you're listening to the audio directly from your computer instead of calling in, please be sure to mute your computer's microphone. So this really helps to minimize the background noise for all participants as well as for myself. Otherwise, sometimes it can be extremely distracting when someone's mic is open and there's a lot of background noise going on that I can actually even lose my train of thought. So if you can make sure your microphones are muted, that would be very much appreciated. And you can access your computer's microphone options by going to Control Panel, Sound, and Recording tabs. So if you could please wait to audibly ask questions until designated times. You'll see throughout the presentations over the next 4 days, there will be this blue bubbly graphic with the question mark. Anytime you see that, please feel free to audibly ask any questions. But please be sure to keep them on topic and minimal. If you have something that's a bit more in-depth or is off topic, it'd be better if you could actually email vendoruniversity@searshp.com and provide any screenshots that would be helpful to be able to answer your questions. So if you can use the chat at any point during the presentation to submit questions. So if we're not at one of those audible question asking points, you can use the chat to ask any of your questions, and hopefully I will get to all of those by the end of the presentation. And if I do miss anything, if I'm not able to answer your question, again, just email vendoruniversity@searshp. So I did ask for you to test out the chat feature. I asked for your location, store format, and flow type. They get a few responses. We have Illinois, Florida, they're both store types. New Jersey, Sears, JIT, Hanes Brands in North Carolina, Kmart and Sears, JIT in DC, Chicago, you're close to me, both DC, and then also South Carolina. Okay, so that's helpful to me. It helps me to know what flow types and what store formats you are, because if everybody was on the Kmart side, then there would be no point in talking about the core item. So just as an example. So thank you so much for your responses. Just a quick note about me. My name is Mona. I'm the Instructional Design and Training Manager for the Vendor and Item Support Team. I own a cat named Tofu and a blind dog named Chloe. I have 3 adorable nephews there in the center, and I love to travel. So since you're going to be hearing from me over the next 4 days, I thought you might want to hear a little bit about me. All right, so moving on, we have our webinar series that we're doing this week, and it consists of 4 days. And today's day 1, and we're covering the IMA Basics and Terminology. Tomorrow we're going to be covering setting up new items in the new item grid. Day 3, we're going to talk about several different IMA features, and then on day 4, we're going to talk about maintenance in IMA. So, day 1, purpose and objectives. The purpose of this session is to introduce you to IMA Basics and Terminology. After completing this session, you will understand the IMA workflow process and basic role responsibilities. You will be familiar with the IMA Basics and Terminology relevant to vendors, and you will be able to identify the components of an item in IMA. So we're going to have an introduction. We're going to go over the workflow process. and then talk about the components and terminology. So first off, what is IMA? IMA is a new item build database. It's basically a library of all the information of products that we sell in our stores. So if it's going to be sold in Kmart, if it's going to be sold in Sears, it has to be built in IMA. Until it's completely built in IMA, we actually won't be able to order any product to our stores. IMA is a role-based application, and we will be talking about that in a few slides. But basically, there are several roles, and when the item has to go through one role completely before it can be passed on to the next row. So typically, it cannot be worked on by multiple rows at the same time. What is IMA not? It is not the order creation system, and it does not feed all of our downstream systems. So we use the information within IMA, such as the KSN number or the core item number, to create orders in other systems, but we do not actually do the ordering in IMA. Also, it doesn't feed all of the other systems that we work with here at SHC. We have a lot of different systems that we do work with here, but it does not downstream feed every one of them. There are several methods of entry. For you as the vendor, all of you should be on data catalog. So you should have a data catalog provider. And we do require that for new vendors. If you're a really old vendor that's been around with us for a long time, maybe you haven't made the switch, I would definitely encourage you to do so. It's going to be much more efficient and save time. Otherwise, if you're doing it manually, it's a very slow process to get your items set up. So for internal users, we have a spreadsheet upload, something called CMA. We also have manual entry is done more often by some of our internal users. We also have Spin. Some of you may have heard of Spin. I don't do any training with Spin, but if your items are only going to be online, they actually get set up in Spin, and then they're going to backfeed to IMA. So that's another method of entry. So there's a lot of different information that gets put into IMA. We're going to be going over this today over the next hour. So workflow and ownership. Like I said, IMA is a role-based application. It's going to start with you as the vendor. You start the process off. You have to initiate items set up in IMA. You'll be utilizing your data sync provider to sync information over to IMA. And then you're actually going to come to IMA, and you'll work synced items in the new item grid. Now for the merchant row, that's where it will go to after the vendor. So merchant is also same thing as the buyer. So we kind of use merchant and buyer interchangeably. So it's going to go to the merchant row after the vendor. They validate some of your entries. They add some specific fields, buying teams such as retail price, core item number, and KSN attributes. After them, it will go to your inventory analyst. They will validate vital information such as the tier group, and they add inventory-specific fields. From there, it goes to supply chain, and then it goes to strictly system automated fields such as hold state and bridging. So if you're trying to do a quick check on your item and you do a quick search and it shows that it's in hold state, don't immediately reach out to IMA help. Don't immediately reach out to your buyer. Give it some time. It does take usually a few hours to get through hold state and bridging. If it's still in hold state the next day or still in bridging the next day, then at that point you should reach out to IMA help because there's something holding it up. There's some sort of system error that's holding it up. But otherwise, be patient. Give it a few hours. It does take some time as it does a second system of checks. If you have Sears items, it will take several hours or overnight bridging roll because it sends that information to the core legacy system, which is where the item setup for Sears is. So once an item is operational, then it can be accessed by our ordering systems, and we can actually put in orders for your items. Now there is a video. I'll be sending out this PowerPoint later today. We have a YouTube video that goes over the workflow process. So if you'd like to view that, I did include the link there that you'll be able to access later today. All right, any questions about the workflow process? Okay, then I'm going to move on to item components. So when items get built in IMA, let's take, for example, a water bottle. That water bottle can be referred to generally as an item, like a piece of merchandise. But that piece of merchandise is going to have several pieces to it, or components. Now, each of those components are going to have a tab in IMA, and there's going to be additional information on each of those tabs about each of the components. So, for example, the components that are relevant to you as a vendor would be the item, KSN, packages, vendor packs, and core item. And here across the top, you can see that they have their own tabs. So the first component we're going to talk about is item. So the item describes the business unit that your product is assigned to. It identifies the division and category. You may be familiar with the term hierarchy, or SHC hierarchy. The SHC hierarchy is the division, category, and subcategory. If you're working on the Sears side, you may also hear have communication from your buying team or inventory analyst where they refer to the Sears hierarchy. Now, the Sears hierarchy and the SHC hierarchy are different. The Sears hierarchy is a division, line, subline, and class. So the division between the Sears hierarchy and SHC hierarchy are usually, but not always, different from each other. So if you have an SHC division of, let's say, 24, you might have a Sears division of 11. There are a few instances where the division number is the same for both of the hierarchies, but usually they are different. So if you're getting confused by some of the communication from your buying team and they are just referring to like a hierarchy or just a division and they haven't distinguished SHC from Sears division, you may ask if that's causing some issues for reporting or setting up your items correctly. So I just wanted to bring that to your attention. Also, everything on an item shares the same store location. It also shares the same selling price. So an item number is the 9-digit number, and it's usually identical to the KSN. For Sears items, it will always be identical to the KSN. For Kmart items, it could be different due to a process called linking. Now, I'm not going to go too much into linking. Linking is an inventory analyst function. However, I know many vendors have a different definition in mind for linking than what it actually is within IMA. I know some vendors think that linking means adding additional UPCs to a KSN. That's not actually linking. So if you ever hear someone refer to linking from SHC, they're talking about a completely different process that's handled by inventory. All right, so we're looking at this example of a water bottle. The SHC hierarchy, you can see your division, category, and subcat, sporting goods, accessories, and water bottles. So what that means is you know that this water bottle is going to be found within the sporting goods section of the store. You know within that section, it's going to be located with all of the other accessories. And then if you look at the subcategory, we know that it's going to be located specifically with all of the other water bottles within the accessories portion of sporting goods. So there are several types of items that may be built in IMA. The very two most common ones are going to be typicals and exploding assortments. So one thing you may be familiar with, here at SHC we have a lot of terms that can mean the same thing, or we have one term that can mean multiple things. So this is an example of that. Typicals are also referred to as eaches or as numbers. Now these are what's actually rung up at the register. So an exploding assortment can also be known as an excess. And this is just an assortment of items. This is not actually what's rung up at the register. Another reference you may hear a parent and children reference, which with the exploding assortment being the parent, and then all of the typicals that belong to that exploding assortment being referred to as the children. So that's another pair of terms that are sometimes used. Some additional types of items, we're going to go over these real fast. These aren't used very commonly. So if you do use them and you need more information about them, then you could reach out to either your buying team or IMA help. We have supply fixtures, we have class control items. Best example for that is curtains. We don't care about the sales history for each of the variances of the curtains because there's so many of them with the different widths and heights. So all we care about is how many of a specific curtain we're selling. So in that instance, it would be built as a class control item. Supply items, so any cleaning supplies, plastic bags with the registers, those all have to be built as a supply item in IMA so they can be ordered for the stores. And then installation agreements and protection agreements. So if you have a product such as a refrigerator or washer or dryer, these usually have installation agreements and protection agreement flags on the items, but those also have to actually be built as an item type so that they can be run up at the register. So the vendor relevant fields on the item tab. You have your item type, you have your SHC division, category and subcategory, your EAS tag required indicator, and your default selling price. So, and a note about the default selling price, it's not actually required, but I know a lot of vendors like to enter it, so that's why I have it listed on there. But just know that it will typically be updated by the merchant. So here you can see your item type. This is a typical item. Down here you can see the SHC hierarchy. Now there's some information that you should be getting from your merchant before you start your item build process. SHC hierarchy is one of those. It's one of the first things you have to enter when you're setting up your grid. So if you're not getting this information, then I would reach out to your buying team and get that because it's very important that it is correct for them, and it is required for you to set up your grid. So if you don't have it, you're just going to be guessing at what the division category and subcategory is. So below that, you have your EAS tag required indicator. These are the security tags that you might find on clothing, or if you have maybe an expensive drill and tools, it might have an EAS tag located within that. And then over to the right, you will see your default selling price. Again, this isn't required, but a lot of vendors do prefer to enter this. So in this view that we're currently in, this is basically like single edit view. So if you do a quick search for an item, and then you click the item tab, this is what you would see. So any questions so far on the item component? Okay, then we're going to move on to the KSN component. So KSN stands for Key Stock Number. It's a 9-digit number assigned by IMA during the initial curation process.
I can't handle it anymore. My neck hurts from holding it.
Did you have a question?
Mm-mm.
Okay, if you have a question, if you could be sure to mute your microphones, that would be really appreciated. So with the key stock number, or the KSN, it's randomly assigned. There's no rhyme or reason to the number that's assigned. And here you can see it also has a dash and a check digit at the end. Now for most cases, like when you do a quick search or in a lot of the reporting, you actually leave this dash and check digit off. If you leave that on when you do a quick search, you actually won't get any results back. Also, you will notice that there's a 0 at the beginning. Many people will omit that when they put it in quick search or try to run a report. You can leave the 0 on there or omit it, but it's fine if you omit it because it will automatically add it back on behind the scenes. KSN may identify the style, size, color, fabric, or information on merchandising strategies. It's primarily used by inventory to monitor sales and order creation. So I know the term KSN is, I'm pretty sure it's proprietary with SHC. I don't know of any other companies that use such a term. So if you're having communication issues with your buying team or your inventory analyst and you're just not sure what product they're actually referring to, you may want to keep in mind that SHC tends to reference the KSN more than the UPC since it's used to track sales and ordering. So you may want to refer to your items with the KSN instead of the UPC. And I actually give the same call out to the buying teams and inventory analysts that you guys are more familiar with UPC. So there's not a lot relevant on the KSN tab for Use the Vendor. Mainly it's the KSN number as well as the KSN description. So here's your KSN number, and you will actually see this at the top of any tab that you go into. And then down here is your KSN description. So this is the description that shows up on a lot of the reporting. So any questions on the KSN? Okay, we'll move on to packages then. So packages contain information on boxes or shipments of product sent to an SHC store. It can identify dimensions and weights, brand, hazard information, country of origin, HTS code, fabric metal content. So a lot of the information in the package tab is owned by you, the vendor. Now there are 3 types of packages. You have each packages, you have cartons, and there's several types of cartons, and you have pallets. So first we're going to talk about each packages. So each item has to have a corresponding each package. Carton and pallet creation is dependent on each packages because they have to have something to put in those cartons and pallets. So each package is what's rung up at the store, and so it has a retail marking number or an RG10 or a UPC. So that's the 12-digit barcode typically. There's a few businesses that have slightly different numbered UPCs, but usually it's the 12-digit barcode for most of our items. And here on this tab, you'll see the retail marking number on the left. On the right, you see the shipping marking number, and that goes on our cartons. So there are several carton types that can be built in IMA. You have each cartons, uniform cartons, and exploding assortment cartons. Those are the 3 most common types of cartons. We also have mixed or sorted cartons, and we have sellable cartons. Now cartons get that shipping marking number, like I mentioned. It's also known as an SG10, I205, or barcode. So in each carton, it's different from in each package. They are not exactly the same. And each carton has both a retail marking number and a shipping marking number. And it's usually just very large product, such as a refrigerator or a washer and dryer or a bicycle. It's sold in the same exact box that it's shipped in, which is why it requires both the retail and shipping marking number. Next we have a uniform carton. A uniform carton consists of multiple eaches in specific quantities. So it could be 12 units of the same water bottle, or perhaps 24 units of the same size and color shirt. Now an exploding assortment is an assortment of items. So you could have, if you work in apparel, it could be 2 smalls, 4 mediums, or 4 larges. If you work in hard lines, it could be maybe an exploding assortment of batteries, such as AA's, AAA's, D's, D's. Now each of the eaches that go in get a retail marking number or that UPC, so they can be rung up at the store. They'll go into your carton, and then this carton gets the shipping marking number. So this is what an exploding assortment looks like in IMA. You have different KSNs here. Each KSN has a unique UPC. Each UPC has a specific quantity. Now, mixed and assorted cartons are a bit different. You may recall that I mentioned that I can't remember if I said it or not, but you cannot use data sync to set up mixed and assorted cartons in IMA. You actually have to build those manually, so it's a different build process. Everything in a mixed and assorted carton has to have the same cost and selling price, and sales and inventory cannot be tracked for the individual UPCs, which we'll get into in the next couple of slides. Typically, this is Kmart items. To be more specific, it's items going through Kmart ordering system. So technically, it could be a Sears item that's going through the Kmart ordering system, but that's really not very common. So if your buying team has suddenly decided they want you to build mixed or assorted cartons and you have Sears items and you've never done that before, I would definitely question it and confirm if that's what they actually want. They may actually have to, they may not realize that they can't do that if it's a Sears JIT or Sears RIM item. So I would definitely question it, and they may have to talk to IMA Help to make sure that they can actually do it. Now, a mixed carton is 1 KSN with fixed quantities of multiple UPCs, and an assorted carton is 1 KSN with unknown quantities of multiple UPCs. So, for example, with the mixed carton, we have an order of 24 6-ounce bottles of bubble bath, 8 peach, 8 vanilla, and 8 orange. So we know exactly how many peaches are being ordered, how many vanillas, and how many oranges are being ordered. Now, once they actually get that order and it gets to our stores, we cannot track the sales at those individual scent levels. We won't know how many peach, vanilla, or orange we're selling. We will only know how many bottles of bubble bath we're selling. So here in IMA, you can see there's a single KSN. This is the same KSN all the way down. There are multiple UPCs, and each UPC does have a specific quantity. So again, we know exactly how many we're getting. We just can't track the UPC's sales once we get it. Now, for an assorted carton, that's multiple quantities, unknown quantities of multiple UPCs on a single KSN. This is used a lot with toys. So for example, 48 Matchbox cars, 12 beach balls, some goggles. And another example would be Ninja Turtle figurines. So if we have an order of 20 figurines, we will not know how many of each of the turtle figurines we're getting. We won't know how many splinters we're getting or how many shredders we're getting. We just know we're getting a total of 20. So in IMA, you can see there's a single KSN. Again, it's the same KSN all the way down. Multiple UPCs. But each quantity for the UPCs is blank. We do have this total eaches here, so we know the total carton quantity. But we don't know how many of each of these UPCs are actually getting. Only the total quantity for the carton. Okay, so moving on to retail cartons. Retail cartons are also known as sellable cartons, and they are retail units that contain multiple retail units inside. So this is most often done with oil or cigarettes. And then we have pallets. There are two types of pallets. We have a uniform pallet, which is really just like a uniform carton, and an exploding assortment pallet, which is just like an exploding assortment carton. So just like the mixed and assorted cartons, pallets cannot be built in the system for items going through a Sears ordering system. It can only be built for items going through the Kmart ordering system. Now, this doesn't mean if you have Sears items that you can't ship pallets. If you have Sears items and you need to ship a pallet, you would build it either as a uniform carton or an exploding assortment carton, and then you would just put it on a pallet before you ship it out. So example of a uniform pallet would be bleach, potting soil, or fertilizer. Exploding assortment pallet could be back-to-school gear such as notebooks, pencils, rulers, highlighters, or children's assorted size underwear and t-shirts. So there are a lot of fields relevant to you as the vendor on the package tab. You own most of the fields that are on this tab. We have your package type, the retail shipping marking number, the marking number or format, dimensions and weights, hazardous information, HTS codes, country of origin, fabric metal content, and package configuration. So here up at the top, you can see your package type. So you may, if you're not positive what type of carton you may have built, you may want to go here and double check the carton that you built. If you were supposed to build a uniform carton and you built an exploding assortment carton, that up here. Then here you see your UPC, and over here is the marking number format. Now moving down, you will see your dimensions and your weight. A lot of vendors tend to have issues with the dimensions and weights, getting them to line up correctly between the eaches and the carton. We will talk a bit more about that on Thursday, I believe, during the maintenance session, because we'll go over how you can do change requests for the dimensions and weights. So below that, you can see your hazardous questions. So it's really important that this information is filled out correctly. If your item is hazardous, it needs to be indicated as such. Otherwise, we will run into some not so great situations like we did a couple years ago where some product was being shipped via air, so on the airplane, and it actually started a fire. It was some sort of camping type gas, and it never should have been on an airplane in the first place. But this question was not answered correctly, so it did end up on an airplane, and it did start a fire. Thankfully, they were able to put it out, and it didn't cause any major damage, but that could have been really bad. So make sure that you are answering this question correctly. If you work in, if your product that you're selling is groceries or pet food, that has its own hazardous storage code as well, because that type of stuff has an expiration date, and we always want to make sure that that type of product is not stored next to certain chemicals. So below the hazardous questions, we have the HTS code. So some of you may be familiar with the HTS code, some of you may not be. It tends to be half and half whenever we ask. But basically, the HTS code gets printed out on the roster whenever the items go onto a truck. So if the truck gets pulled over and they're asked to produce a list of everything in the truck, then that list is made by the HTS codes that were selected here. So sometimes I know it's difficult to find an exact match for your product, so you just find the closest match that you can. And it's not, they're not super picky about it because sometimes they don't have an exact match. So just find the best match that you can with your HTS codes. Down below on the bottom part of the page, you will see your country of origin. You can list more than one country for the country of origin. So if part of your product was made in China, part of it's made in India, you can list both of those countries. Now if you do list just the U.S. as the only country here, please make sure your product is actually U.S. made, because there are a lot of people who will only want to buy products that are made 100% in the U.S. So we want to make sure we're giving them the correct information on their products. And then over to the right, you will see fabric and metal content. This is not always required depending on the product, but you do want to make sure that this is correct as well. So this is what the carton package looks like. Up here you can see this is an exploding assortment carton. Down here you have your dimensions and your weights. So your dimensions and weights for your carton have to add up correctly based upon the eaches that are within that carton. Otherwise, you will get a hard error when you try to approve. So we do have some dimensions and weight guidelines here. They do have to align with GS1 standards on cube measurement. Cube is calculated by depth times width times height for both each and carton level. So for example, if the each dimensions are 5 by 4 by 2, the cube of that item would be 40. And then the each weight is 5 pounds. So with that example, we're going to have 2 items in a carton. IMA will sum the each's cube and expect the carton cube to be equal to or greater than the sum. So if you take the 5 by 4 by 2, the cube sum for the carton, if there's 2 items in there, would be 80. So at minimum, it does have to be 80. So 79 will result in an error. And there is a pretty large allowance for going over that carton cube. But if it goes grossly over, like 500, that would also result in an error. Now the weight does have to match exactly. So if there's 2 items and they weigh 5 pounds each, the carton weight would be 10 pounds. So we care the most about the carton dimensions and weights. They have to be correct or there could be potential charges. So if we are planning our truck pickups according to the information that you provide, and we expect you to take up the entire truck, and then we send the truck there and you only fill up half of the truck, then that's going to cost us money because we could have scheduled another truck pickup to fully utilize that truck space. In the same regard, if you say that the information you give us is going to take up half of the truck and you're the first stop, and then you end up taking up the entire truck, well, the second pickup that we had scheduled, we're not going to be able to do at that point. So we care about the carton dimensions the most because that helps us with planning our truck stops. There are some exemption rules. For example, with dimensions, if items are compressed and stacked or nested, you can use the exemption flag. So if you have, for instance, chairs that are stacked, or you have pillows compressed into a carton, then that can allow the dimension exception indicator to be clicked on. Another example would be if the display is packed within the shipper. That's another reason that you could use the dimension exception indicator. With weight, there are no exemptions. The carton weight must always align with your each's sum weight. So if the exemption rules apply, you can change the dimension exception indicator flag to Y on in-process items. Updating the dimension exception item will be discussed on Thursday in the IMA maintenance session. So this only needs to be flagged at the UPC or each level. If the dimension exception indicator needs to be turned on, it does not need to be done on the carton level. So any questions about the Packages tab? Okay, we will move on to the Vendor Pack tab then. So an item cannot be ordered without a vendor pack. The vendor pack identifies vendor-specific information such as the order done, flow type, cost, vendor stock number, projected first in-store date, and ship points. So again, some of those are the ones I just listed, the vendor relevant fields. We also have the total eaches per enter and number of enters, as well as the vendor description, the EAS tag indicator that's on the item tab as well as the vendor pack tab. So you just need to make sure that those answers match between the two tabs. And we also have California Prop 65 questions. All right, so here up at the very top of the page on the far right, you will see your flow type. Now some of you may only be set up for a single flow type. And if you're just set up for a single flow type, then that should be easy when you go to set up your grid because you only have one answer. Some of you may be set up for multiple flow types, or you may even have multiple ordering dones. So if you have multiple ordering dones and multiple flow types, and utilize different ones within for the same buying team, you may need to find out what flow type and order dones they are wanting you to use. So when they give you that information in the beginning, remember I said they should be giving you the SHC hierarchy. This is some additional information that they should be passing along to you. Like I said, if you always do the same setup every single time, then you may not need them to pass along the dones and flow type for you. However, they may be requesting you to select a flow type that you are not set up for. So if you go to select the flow type they indicated and it's not available in the drop-down list, you should reach back out to your buying team and confirm that that's what they're wanting. And if so, they're going to need to put in a request for that additional flow type to be added to your ordering done. Otherwise, you're not going to be able to select it. Same thing with the ownership code. If they are buying product from you for both Sears and Kmart, you may need them to confirm which store format you're building this item for. If you only ever build Sears or Kmart, then again, that answer should be easy when you go to select your ownership code. They should also include the cost that they agreed upon with you during their negotiations, because this does have to be approved by both vendor and merchant. So we have a system of checks and balances in there for the cost. So the vendor stock number can be whatever you want it to be. It's kind of a way for you to group and identify your items. The vendor description can be whatever you'd like it to be as well. And again, down below here, at the bottom you see your vendor applied EAS tag and EAS tag required indicator. And then over on the right, we see our California Prop 65 questions. So many of you are probably aware that California has a additional set of requirements for products or product packaging that contains PVC. So be sure to answer these questions correctly, and if you do not know the answers, reach out to someone within your business. Now, if you scroll all the way down to the bottom of the page, you'll see this second screenshot here, and that breaks down the DC locations that your item is going to, along with your ship points. So the ship point is where we are picking up the product from you. So most of you will probably just be using a single ship point for that item, so it doesn't matter our DC location. Some of you may want to use multiple ship points for different DC locations. So when you do your initial item setup in the grid, you can only select one. You can't change the selection for different DC locations. So if that's something that you want to do, you have to let your item become operational, and then you have to go back and do a change request on the ship point, and you'll be able to choose different ship points for different DC locations. And we will be going over that on Thursday. So there's a bit of terminology I wanted to go over with you as well, called inners and eaches. So inners are internal cartons within a carton, and they may be broken down in our DC, and then the inners shipped to different stores. So let me go back to this page real quick. You'll see here we have total eaches, eaches per inner, and number of inners. So here for total eaches, eaches per inner, number of inners, we see 1863. So we have a total of 18 eaches. There's 18 Tylenol PM boxes. And then we have 3 inners, so 3 of these smaller boxes. And then those are all going into this. So the eaches per inner is 6, number of inners is 3. Now if you aren't actually packing your items in any inners, and you're just putting, let's say, the 18 boxes of Tylenol PM straight into the main carton, then it would be 1818. So there's 18 eaches, and these are also counted as inners, so it's 1 each per inner, and then 18 inners. So if you have, let's say, 6 Tylenol PM that you're putting in a carton, that would be 616, or 10 would be 10110. All right, so I have a scenario here. My merchant or inventory analyst has requested that I create a new vendor pack for an existing item. Why would I need to create a new vendor pack? So there's a lot of reasons that you may create additional vendor packs for existing items. Could be that you need a new flow type if you've been shipping BC and now we want you to do DSD, direct to store. You cannot change the flow type on an existing item. You would have to create a new vendor pack with that new flow type. Same thing for additional store format. That can't be changed with a change request. It has to have a new vendor pack. If it's a different vendor, so there's a couple of examples for this. It could be that vendor A has been supplying a product for a while, but they're going to stop supplying it, and now vendor B is going to come in and pick that up. So vendor B would now need a new vendor pack. Another example would be the disposable plastic bottles of water. We cannot get our full supply from a single vendor, so we actually have several vendors that supply that item for us. So every single one of those vendors have to have their own vendor pack. Another example would be a change in carton configurations. That kind of goes along with new each or member. So if we've been getting a carton from you with a configuration of 2446, and now we would like to be able to order it in a configuration of 3443, then we would need both a new carton and the new vendor pack for that new configuration. And finally, if there's more than one cost. So typically, all of your vendor packs for an item have to be the same cost. An exception would be if we've been selling your product in the 48 states, and we decide we want to start selling it in Hawaii or Alaska, or maybe even Puerto Rico. Well, most likely, because of the location of those places, the cost would be higher. So it would need its own vendor pack with its own cost. So any questions so far on vendor packs? Okay, we're going to move on to core item then. So the core item is really important for those of you that work on the Sears side. It's required for all items going through a Sears point of sale. If it's going to be sold in a Sears store, then it has to have a core item number on it. So before Sears and Kmart combined into SHC, Sears had the core system as its legacy item build system. And it's still used today. When we combined, they created IMA, and they added a core item tab onto IMA during the setup process. And that information will then get pushed out to the core legacy system during the bridging role. So core item number, you may hear this referred to as a div item. The division is 3 digits, so if it doesn't have the zeros in front, you can add the zeros, and then a dash, and then a 4 or 5 digit item number. And just like the KSN is used primarily for inventory, sales, and ordering on the Kmart side, the core item is used primarily for inventory, sales, and ordering on the Sears side. It can also identify the hierarchy. Remember I talked about the Sears hierarchy versus the SHC hierarchy at the beginning. It can identify the size and color as well for items that that's relevant to, such as apparel. So some of your items may be set up as non-skewed, and some of those items you may have multiple KSNs on a single core item number. And each of those KSNs have to have a SKU number. So your buying team will come back to you and give you they should give you the core item number as well as the SKUs, if your item has SKUs. And you use that for ticketing purposes. So if items are not ticketed with the correct div item and SKU, the item may ring at the register as something completely different or not at all. So correct ticketing is extremely important. It's not easy for us to go back in and change this once it's operational. We actually can't do it through a normal change request, and the process takes about 7 to 10 business days. So if your product has already made it to the stores and you ticketed with the wrong item number and SKUs, then we actually have to pull that product off of the floor, and then it's going to remain in the back room for 7 to 10 business days until it can be corrected in the system. Because it involves core and bridging overnight, that's why it takes so long. Every single step has to process overnight before we can do the next one. So just to close with the core item number, if you have any questions about the core item number, if you're not sure if you have the correct ones, please double check with your merchant before you start your ticketing. Because like I said, it basically pulls the product off the floor. The product can't be sold during that entire time that it's being fixed. So any questions about the core item? Okay, we're going to go ahead and get close to wrapping up here. Some key points to remember. The IMA setup starts with you, the vendor. Items cannot be ordered until item setup in IMA has been completed. So remember that until you approve it, it can't really go on to the next rows. So if you're not approving your item after you've synced it over, you may be holding up that setup process and preventing your item from being ordered. If you build each uniform or exploding assortment cartons, you should be using a data sync provider and the new item grid. If you have to build items manually and you need assistance, please reach out to IMA help at searshc.com. And finally, your buyer should be providing you with some information to get started on your item build, such as flow, store format, cost, SHC hierarchy. So if you do not know what this information is, if you do different setups, or if you're just a brand new vendor and you just don't know, please reach out to your buying team if they did not provide you with this information. And on the very last slide, you can look at this later for your reference, but basically I just list out the fields that are the responsibility of the vendor as dictated by the system. Now, depending on the buying team that you work with, you may have some additional fields that you set up for them, but these are the minimum system required fields. So any questions at all? Let's check and see if I got anything in the chat. Doesn't look like we have anything in the chat. All right, so we finished a few minutes early. That's great. Usually I'm trying to squeeze everything in, so that's really good. I will stay on the line for a few minutes, so if you think of any questions or you just want to wait until the end to ask when people are signing off, I'll stay on until about 3 o'clock. Otherwise, have a great day, and I will see you guys tomorrow.